We did the scavenger hunt one time for our sororities in college. Most of the items weren't that hard to find, but there are some I can't mention here. One of the others was a urinal, meaning we had to sneak into a men's restroom and take a picture with one. We started the scavenger hunt at night, so that actually wasn't too hard as most of the bathrooms on campus were empty. My group consisted of me, my roommate Sarah, and two other girls from our pledge class, Emily and Jess. We were all a little buzzed from the pre-hunt party, giggling and whispering as we crept across the quad toward the old science building. It was one of those massive, outdated structures from the 70s, with flickering fluorescent lights and hallways that always smelled like formaldehyde. The men's restroom on the first floor was our target, isolated and rarely used after hours, and perfect for a quick snap without getting caught. We pushed open the door quietly, the hinge letting out a low creak that echoed off the tiled walls. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb over the sinks, casting long shadows across the row of urinals against the far wall. No one was inside, just like we'd hoped. "Okay, let's make this fast," Sarah whispered, pulling out her phone. Emily and Jess posed first, flashing peace signs next to the porcelain fixtures, their faces lit up by the camera flash. I went last, leaning in awkwardly to get the shot, trying not to think about how gross it all was. But that's when I noticed it. As I straightened up, something caught my eye in the urinal closest to the floor, a small dark smudge at the bottom, like a piece of paper or trash that had gotten stuck in the drain. Instinctively, I leaned closer, squinting. It wasn't trash, but rather a folded note, soggy but intact, with handwriting scrawled across it and what looked like permanent marker. The words were smudged from the water, but I could still make it out. "Smile for the camera, you're next." My stomach dropped. "Guys, look at this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They crowded around, and Jess fished it out with a wad of toilet paper, unfolding it carefully. The full message read, "Smile for the camera, you're next, the Watcher." We all stared at it, the laughter dying in our throats. "It's probably just some dumb prank from a frat guy," Emily said, but her voice shook. Sarah snapped a photo of it anyway, joking that it could be bonus points for the hunt. We were about to leave when we heard it, a faint drip 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 from one of the urinals farther down the row. This wasn't the usual plumbing sound, but irregular, like someone tapping their finger. Then we heard a soft scrape, like shoes shifting on the tile floor. We froze. I was like 99% sure the bathroom was empty. We'd even checked the stalls. "Hello?" I called out, my heart pounding. There was no answer, just more dripping. Jess bolted for the door first, but it wouldn't budge. She yanked harder, panic rising. "It's stuck!" The scraping grew louder, coming from behind us now, from the shadows near the last urinal. We turned, and that's when we saw it, a figure emerging from the narrow maintenance closet at the end of the room, partially hidden by the partition. It was tall, hooded, and holding something metallic that glinted under the light. Maybe a wrench or a knife. "Run!" Sarah screamed, but there was nowhere to go. Emily started banging on the door, yelling for help, while I grabbed a trash can and hurled it toward the figure. It clattered across the floor, buying us a second. Finally, the door gave way. Maybe it had just been jammed before, and we spilled out into the hallway, sprinting back to the quad without looking back. We reported what we saw to campus security that night, handing over the note and describing the guy. They searched the building but found nothing, no one in the closet, and no signs of forced entry. The urinals were clean, no evidence of anything unusual. They chalked it up to our imaginations, maybe enhanced by whatever we'd been drinking. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. When Sarah checked her phone later, the photos from the restroom were there, clear as day. In the one of me posing by the urinal, in the reflection of the porcelain, you can see a face peering out from that maintenance closet. And it's smiling. And in the background of the note photo, scrawled faintly on the wall tile that we hadn't noticed before, was the message, "I've been watching you all semester." We never finished the scavenger hunt. To this day, I can't step into a public restroom without checking every shadow and every drain. Because sometimes, the real monsters aren't hiding in the dark. They're right there, in plain sight, waiting for you to get just close enough. My middle school had one weird bathroom that legit seemed 20 years older than the rest of the building. It had small yellow tiles on the floor and partway up the walls, and the three urinals were really close together. They didn't have any dividers between them or anything, and for that reason we only used the ones on the ends. The bathroom was on the second floor, tucked away at the end of a hallway that led to the old storage rooms, places where teachers kept dusty textbooks and broken projectors. Most kids avoided it because the lights buzzed like angry bees and creep people out, and the sink faucets dripped constantly, sending echoes throughout the empty space. But during lunch or between classes, if the main bathrooms were packed, you literally have no choice. I'd use it on average maybe once a week, always picking the left urinal, staring at the cracked tile in front of me to avoid any awkward eye contact if someone else came in. One day in 7th grade, I ducked in there right after gym class, desperate to go. The place was empty as usual. I took my spot on the left, and as I was finishing up, I heard this faint whispering sound from the middle urinal. It wasn't like water running. Instead, it was more like someone murmuring under their breath, too low to make out the words. I froze, then glanced over. There was no one there, just the porcelain gleaming under the yellowish light. After a second, I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe the pipes groaning or wind from a vent. But as I washed my hands, I caught a glimpse in the mirror, a shadow flickering behind us, right where the middle urinal was. I spun around to see nothing. I was now thoroughly creeped out and bolted out of there. A few days later, my buddy Mike actually mentioned the same thing. We were in line for lunch, and he goes, "Dude, that old bathroom's haunted or something. I swear I heard someone whispering in there yesterday." Mike described it exactly like I had, low murmurs from the middle urinal, like a conversation you couldn't quite join. We laughed it off in the moment, but later decided to test it. After school, Mike and I snuck back in, phones out to record. The bathroom was dim, the drip from the sinks louder than ever. Mike took the right urinal, and I took the left. We waited, staring at the middle one. At first we couldn't hear anything, but after a minute, sure enough, the whispering started. It was faint and raspy, like an old radio tuning in. Instinctively we leaned closer, hearts pounding. It almost sounded like names. Our names? Mike, come closer. Alex. My name's Alex. We backed up fast, but Mike tripped on the uneven tiles, and as he caught himself, his hand brushed the middle urinal. That's when we saw it. Etched into the porcelain, barely visible under years of grime, were dozens of tiny scratches. It was like someone had clawed at it with their fingernails. And at the bottom, in faded marker, we saw the message, "He whispers to the ones who listen." Mike and I ran out, then showed the recording to a couple of our friends. On playback, the whispers were even clearer. "Join us, in the middle." By next week, the rumors had spread all around the school. It turns out, back in the 80s, before the school renovation, a kid had gone missing there. Some janitor found him in the bathroom, slumped over the middle urinal, dead from what they called a freak accident. Apparently he slipped and hit his head. But there was some doubt, and the story went that in his last moments he'd scratched messages into the urinal, begging for help that never came. The school boarded up that bathroom a month later, and another kid claimed he saw a pale face staring back from the drain while using the middle urinal. They said it was for maintenance, but we knew better. To this day, I can't use a urinal without picking the end one, and if I hear even the slightest drip that sounds off, I get out of there fast. Because sometimes, the whispers aren't just in your head, they're waiting for you to stand still long enough to really hear them. When I was a kid, I swear to God I saw an actual urinal exhibit at a museum. To be clear, I think this was just some random traveling exhibit about indoor plumbing or something, but from what I remember, this one entire room was completely full of urinals. Thinking back now, it's such a strange memory, but it was also the most terrifying from my childhood, and you're about to hear why. I was maybe 8 or 9, on a school field trip to this big history museum in the city. It was the kind that had dinosaur bones and ancient artifacts that bored most kids, but fascinated me. The urinal exhibit was tucked away in a side wing, labeled "The Evolution of Sanitation," or some dry title like that. Our teacher rushed us through it, saying it was educational, but the boys in my class snickered and pointed. The room was dimly lit, with spotlights on each urinal mounted on pedestals, like they were priceless vases or something. There were antique ones from the 1800s and porcelain beasts with ornate designs. They also had modern ones that looked ripped straight from a gas station. Signs explained how they worked and their history, and even cultural stuff about public restrooms. It looked weird, but otherwise harmless. My group eventually wandered off while the chaperone was distracted, and I found myself alone in the far corner, staring at this one urinal that stood out. It was from the early 1900s, supposedly salvaged from an old asylum that had burned down. The plaque said it was a relic of institutional hygiene, but the porcelain was chipped and stained like it had seen too much. As I leaned in to read the fine print, I heard a gurgle from inside it, not the recorded audio loop playing in the background, but a real, wet sound, like water swirling down a drain. Instinctively I jumped back, heart racing, but eventually chalked it up to the museum's plumbing. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, like wind through a crack, coming from the urinal's bowl. I bent down, ear closer, and it grew clearer. It was a man's voice, hoarse and desperate, murmuring, "Help me, they're coming, flush them away." I froze, glancing around. The room was empty now, my classmates' voices distant in the next hall. The whispers shifted to sobs, and then laughter, echoing softly off the other urinals like they were joining in. I tried to back away, but my shoe caught on the carpet and I fell against another exhibit piece, a wall-mounted urinal from a World War II bunker. My hand touched the cold surface, and suddenly the room's lights flickered, plunging everything into shadows except for those spotlights. In the reflection of the asylum urinal's porcelain, I saw it, a face, pale and twisted, staring back from the drain. It wasn't my reflection. Instead, it was older, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched in a silent scream. The whispers intensified, now from all around. "Join us, down here, where it's clean." I scrambled up and ran, bursting into the main hall, tears streaming. My teacher found me hyperventilating, and they called my parents. The museum staff insisted it was just the interactive audio malfunctioning, maybe triggered by a sensor. No one else heard anything though, and when they checked, the exhibits were silent. But here's the part that haunts me. Years later, as an adult, I looked up that asylum online. Turns out, it was infamous for experiments on patients, lobotomies, shock therapy, all in the name of mental hygiene. One story stood out. A patient who drowned himself in a urinal, convinced the drains led to a pure world where his demons couldn't follow. The fire that destroyed the place? It was started in the bathroom wing, with no clear cause. And that traveling exhibit? It vanished from records after a few stops, like it never existed. Now, whenever I use a public restroom, I avoid looking down, because sometimes in the quiet, I still hear that gurgle. And I wonder if those whispers were an invitation or a warning. I got through college like everyone else, and actually met my husband there, and I'm still happily married to him today. But my first college experience was downright horrifying. I met my roommate the day I moved into my dorm. Right from the get-go, I could tell she had issues. Her name was Amanda, and she spoke very softly and didn't make eye contact. I didn't actually have any problem with her being shy or introverted. It was what I eventually figured out she was saying that low-key freaked me out. Midway through our second conversation, I picked up on the fact she kept mentioning urinals. It wasn't connected to what we were talking about in any way, at least not in a way that made logical sense. We were unpacking boxes, chatting about majors and hometowns, when she mumbled something about the urinals watching. I laughed it off at first, thinking I'd misheard her. Maybe she said journals or eternals. But no, it happened again later that night as we set up our beds. "Urinals, they see everything," she whispered while folding her sheets. I asked Amanda what she meant, but she just shook her head and changed the subject to cafeteria food. Okay, it was weird, but freshmen are stressed, right? I figured she had some quirky fixation, maybe from a bad experience or an inside joke I wasn't in on yet. However, a week in, things got stranger. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her sitting at her desk, sketching. I peeked once, pages filled with crude drawings of urinals, rows of them like soldiers with eyes scribbled in the drains. "Amanda, are you okay?" I'd ask. She'd crumple the paper and mutter, "They whisper at night." Eventually I suggested she talk to a counselor, but Amanda insisted it was nothing. Then came the photos. Amanda started collecting them, snaps from her phone of men's restrooms around campus, the library, the gym, even the old admin building. She'd pinned them to her bulletin board when she thought I was asleep, arranging them like some kind of map. It started to become too much, and one evening I finally confronted her. "What's with the urinal obsession? It's creeping me out." Amanda looked me in the eye, her voice barely audible. "They're portals. My brother, he disappeared into one when we were kids. At a rest stop. I saw him go in, but he never came out. The police ruled him as a runaway, but I heard the flush and the laughing." At this point I thought Amanda was delusional, possibly due to the trauma. I reported the conversation anonymously to the campus wellness center, hoping they'd help her switch rooms or get therapy. However, that night, Amanda vanished. I came back from a study group around midnight, and her side of the room was empty. Bed made, drawings gone, like she'd never even been there. But on my pillow, there was a note. "They're calling you now. Check the urinal in the basement." Our dorm had a creepy old basement laundry room with a single unisex bathroom that no one used because the lights were always out and it smelled like mildew. Against my better judgment, I went down there, phone flashlight on, heart pounding. The door creaked open, and there it was, one lone urinal on the wall, ancient and stained. As I approached it, I heard it, a low gurgle, then whispers echoing from the drain. It wasn't from water, but rather voices, overlapping. "Come closer. Join us. Amanda's here." I backed away, but my foot slipped on something wet and I fell, smacking my head on the sink. When I came to, the whispers had stopped, but etched into the porcelain were fresh scratches. They spelled out my name, over and over. Campus security searched the area, but Amanda was gone. No records of her even enrolling. At one point, someone even said I must have imagined her, that the room was assigned as a single. But I know she was real. She must have just snuck in without being a student. In any case, now every time I pass a men's room, I hear that faint flush in the back of my mind, calling me. It seems like it's waiting for me to step just a little too close. A few years ago, something happened that I still can't explain. I was a woman in my early 20s and had just moved to a new city to start an office job. I quickly made a few friends from work and we'd visit some of the local bars. One Friday night, we ended up at this dive called the Rusty Tap, an old brick building from the 20s that smelled like stale beer and forgotten secrets. The place was packed and live music was blaring, and after a couple rounds I needed the bathroom bad. The women's room had a line out the door, typical, so one of my coworkers, Lisa, suggested the unisex one in the basement. "It's gross, but it's usually empty," she said. I shrugged and headed down the creaky stairs, the air getting noticeably cooler and mustier with each step. The basement bathroom was an absolute relic, flickering bulb, cracked mirror, and one stall with a door that didn't lock. There was also a single urinal mounted on the wall like an afterthought. The stall was occupied, someone grunting behind the door, so desperate and a little tipsy, I eyed the urinal. I'd heard girls do it in emergencies, hover and aim, right? No one was around, so I did. It was awkward, I felt the cold porcelain against my skin, but relief came quick. As I washed up, I noticed faint scratches on the urinal's edge, almost like old graffiti. Thirst never ends. Weird, but bars have weird stuff. I laughed it off and rejoined my friends upstairs. By the time we left around midnight, I felt that familiar twinge again, needing to pee, even though I'd just gone. I hit the apartment bathroom as soon as I got home, but an hour later, lying in bed, it hit even harder. Urgent, like my bladder was filling faster than possible. I went again, and then twice more before dawn. By morning it was constant, burning desperation that no amount of trips to the toilet could quench. I'd pee, feel empty for a few minutes, and then bam, like a faucet turned on inside me. At first I thought it was a UTI or too much drinking. I chugged cranberry juice and saw a doctor who ran some tests, which turned up nothing. She suggested it was stress from the new job. However, the sensations only worsened. By day 2, I was excusing myself from meetings every half hour, my co-workers whispering. I also started having nightmares, dreaming of that urinal, water swirling endlessly down its drain, pulling me in. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, racing to the bathroom yet again. On day 3, I confided in Lisa. She turned pale. That basement urinal? There's a story about that bar. Back in the Prohibition era, it was a speakeasy. A woman, some bootlegger's wife, drowned her rival in the original plumbing down there, jealous over an affair. They say she cursed the spot, claiming anyone who invaded her territory would thirst forever. But it's just an urban legend. I dug online that night, between frantic bathroom runs. Old articles mentioned unexplained deaths at the Rusty Tap, women found dehydrated in the basement, bladders ruptured, like they'd peed themselves to death trying to relieve an impossible urge. Panic set in. By day 4, I couldn't leave my apartment, every step sloshed with phantom fullness. Then the hallucinations came, whispers from faucets, more, give more, echoing like that drain. I decided to return to the bar, alone, basement door unlocked in the dead of night. The urinal gleamed under the bulb, scratches deeper now, my initials appearing among them. I collapsed against it, begging for release. A gurgle rose from the pipe and the desperation eased, just a bit, as if feeding it my fear. I moved cities after that, the curse fading with distance. But even now, years later, in any bathroom, I feel a faint tug. And I never, ever use anything but a proper toilet. Because some curses don't flush away. They just wait for you to get desperate enough to come back. I've been a plumber for almost 30 years, and within that time I've seen a lot of really bad plumbing. I'm talking on the level of shows like Hoarders, where the water's been off for years and the entire house is falling apart. But this one place takes the cake, and incidentally, I still don't have an explanation for what I witnessed that day. It was a call from the city about an old warehouse on the outskirts, abandoned since the 90s after the company went bankrupt amid some scandal. They were prepping it for demolition, but first needed the pipes cleared to avoid any environmental hazards. It's just a routine flush and inspection, the foreman said. I showed up alone, toolkit in hand, the building a hulking skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows. The air inside was thick with dust and that metallic tang of decay. I started in the basement, where the main lines were, but the real issue was upstairs, in what used to be the employee locker room. The bathroom there was a time capsule, faded blue tiles, sinks crusted with grime, and a row of 5 urinals along the wall, their porcelain yellowed like old teeth. No one had touched this place in decades, so I wasn't surprised when I tested the flush, nothing but a dry rattle from the pipes. I got to work, snaking the lines and pouring in chemicals to break up the clogs. As I knelt by the first urinal, I heard a faint drip. Not from the pipes I just cleared, but from farther down the row. Drip, drip, like a leaky faucet, but rhythmic, almost deliberate. I ignored it at first. Old buildings settle, echoes play tricks. But then came the gurgle, low and wet, from the third urinal. I shone my flashlight in. The bowl was bone dry, but at the bottom something dark shifted, like a shadow uncoiling. I reached in with my gloved hand, stupid, I know, and pulled out a wad of hair? It was long, matted strands, clumped with what felt like dried mucus. It was gross, but not unheard of in clogs. I tossed it aside and moved on. By the time I hit the 4th urinal, the dripping had turned to a whisper. This wasn't wind, it was words, muffled and overlapping, like voices trapped in the plumbing. Help, down here, cold. I froze, heart hammering. My rational mind said it was air pockets releasing, but I leaned closer, ear to the porcelain. The voices were clearer now. They're coming. Flush us out. I jumped back, knocking my tools over. At the same time, I realized the air felt colder, heavier. I tried to radio the foreman, but only received static. There was no signal in the basement depths. Panic rising, I decided to pack up fast, but as I turned to leave, the last urinal flushed on its own. A gush of black water erupted, spilling over the lip, reeking of rot. In the overflow, there was more hair and bits of cloth, and fingers? Small, skeletal stumps, like they'd been gnawed clean. I wasted no more time and bolted upstairs, then called the cops from outside. They searched the building, including the bathroom, but found nothing. No clogs, no bones, urinals dry as dust. But the warehouse history? Turns out, during the bankruptcy, workers went missing. They were 5 men, and they were last seen in that locker room. There were also rumors of a cover-up, bodies disposed of in the pipes to hide embezzlement murders. The city razed the place a week later. But sometimes, on jobs now, when I'm under a sink or clearing a drain, I hear that drip again. And I wonder if those voices ever really flushed away, or if they're still whispering, waiting for the next poor soul to listen too close.